folks, and welcome to this week's hi-fi review. And as a quick aside, it's hot. So if you see me leaking, I'm not coming down with something. Well, I am. I'm coming down with heat. I normally have a sort of English rose pallid whiteness. So again, blotchiness, all that sort of stuff. It's the heat. But back to the review. Now, in this week's hi-fi review, we're looking at Technics. And as most of you will know, Technics is rather famous for its turntables, but it doesn't just do turntables, it does other things. One of those other things is amplifiers. In this particular case, it's a relatively high-end amplifier too. It's an integrated, and it's called the Su-G700M2, and it's priced at £2,199. Now, this is quite a large integrated amplifier, but it is surprisingly light for that size, I have to say. And as soon as I picked it up, I did think to myself, I wonder if this particular amplifier will be light in bass terms. And well, we'll see about that during the review. Now, already, I think we're heading straight into the land of techie. So let me transport you to that far off distant place as we go towards a closer look. Welcome to the closer look section for the Technics, well, I'll call it the G700 for brevity's sake, shall I? The Technics G700 integrated amplifier. And what you're looking at here, well, it's a quite a distinct design. As you can see, this is a full width component. So that means 430 by 428 millimeters. But it's that height of 148 millimeters that impresses and helps to place the G700 into a design niche all of its own. The weight of the box, something I've already alluded to, is by no means deficient by any means. We're still looking at a weight of 12.6 kilograms here. Even so, when you look at, say, for example, the Parasound HINT 6, that is 15 kilograms heavy, while the, and again let me pluck another name out of the ether, the Leema Quasar, that's a whopping 17 kilograms. Now, it's not that much of a deal, but even so, looking at the size of this box, I did brace myself before picking up this Technics amplifier, and then I had that, moment when nothing happened. As for the height itself, well, it's mainly there to accommodate these rather large and, I would say, rather nice VU meters. Now, aesthetic quality is such a personal thing, so I realise that some of you will, I don't know, maybe will be cringing when you see them, but I must admit that I do have a thing about VU meters. Now, it's a problem I've had for a long time. Yes, I'm on medication, but nevertheless, there it is. Now let's stay on the VU meters just for a little bit, because I would say, I don't know, they look a little bit odd because of this entire presentation that is Technics' own. It's their own thing. That is, the VUs are over large. They sit on a white background and they are placed in the lower part of the front chassis. I would describe these as, well, non-standard. Above the meters is a rather large centrally placed volume knob with a power button and its attendant light to the left, and a source selector knob and its attendant little output window to the right. The layout of the front fascia is easy to digest and to use. Flicking around to the rear is a DAC module on the top left there, as you can see in this image, and as you look at the rear, you'll see it features 2 optical ports and a pair of coax ports, plus you get a USB-B port, ideal for laptop connection. Now, as we are doubling up here in true Technics mode, I wonder whether Technics may have missed a trick by also not including a USB-A, preferably front-mounted, port for music-loaded USB sticks. I'm not sure why they didn't include that. Below this DAC section there's a pair of RCA outs plus pre-outputs. Just to the left of those is a built-in phono amplifier plus 2 pairs of RCA inputs. Again, if I'm being super picky, I would have liked to have seen 1 or 2 more of these analog inputs, just to cover all eventualities, especially at this price point. Now, as we move to the right, we seem to be entering into a sort of metal desert, which begins with the usual speaker terminals and ends over on its lonesome on the far right, an IEC power socket that seems to reside in a barren metallic expanse. Any further than that, and any intrepid hi-fi user would surely die first. The remote is a typical Japanese large format, metal-based, sturdy, fully featured model, which includes useful commands such as a mute button, dimmer switch for those VU meters, and a menu button in which you can change internal settings. Now, these internal settings, well, they range really, such as flicking the phono amplifier from moving magnet mode into moving coil mode. You can change the internal tone and balance controls, and you can upgrade the firmware when applicable. Now, I find a lot of these options interesting because a lot of them normally you would see as knobs and buttons stuck on the outside of the chassis. Here, all of those knobs and buttons have been done away with, tone controls, phono amplifier choices, things like that. They've been placed in software only. Personally, I see that as a good thing. When you're looking at an amplifier, if you can make that amplifier as simple as possible, it reduces the noise floor, in general terms, that is. So I like that. I like what Technics has done with those options. Inside the box, it features something called the Geno engine. Now, this has nothing apparently to do with Kevin Rowland at all. It actually stands for jitter elimination and noise shaping optimization. And it's designed to eliminate jitter, surprisingly enough, and distortion. There's also something called the LAPC, which stands for Load Adaptive Phase Calibration, which is a sort of speaker optimization app. Internally, many of the parts are partitioned to reduce noise, so they're spaced out as much as possible, and there are boundaries and physical pieces of metal in the way to stop any of that high frequency transfer, which you sometimes do get and can introduce higher high frequency noise output. So good on Technics for paying attention to those little things, which are so very important, of course. This extra damping is derived from a 2-layer construction with a 1.2mm thick and 2mm thick steel plates. There's a top panel which is 1.6mm thick, and you get a 7mm thick aluminium front panel. There's been plenty of attention directed at the power supply as well. The switching frequency has been increased from 100 kHz to 400 kHz. This apparently increases stability overall, while Technics has talked about a very low noise regulator on the circuit board itself. All of this means that, again, the noise floor should be pretty low indeed, but hey, we'll see. And actually, we'll see right now, shall we? Because that's enough of Technics techie talk, I reckon. What does this box actually sound like? Well, let's go to the sound quality tests and we will find out. welcome back to the sound quality tests for the Technics G700 integrated amplifier. And I began with CD and Ryuichi Sakamoto's classic album Beauty, which is packed. The reason I picked this, let me tell you, the reason I picked this was because it's packed, as I say, with different vocals displaying varying textures. We've got electric guitars, synths, percussion, secondary percussion. I picked a couple of tracks with a Spanish guitar, some wind instruments. There's all kinds going on here. And it also means that any amplifier trying to tackle this has a job separating everything instead of presenting you with a melange, a mishmash, especially when, for example, a wailing electric guitar threatens to mask more delicate secondary percussion effects, for example. Now, first impressions are always important in life, aren't they? I'm sure you'd agree. I had a first impression of the G700, and my first impression was this. Well, yeah, I didn't quite expect this first impression. Why? Well, I don't know. When I listen to big Japanese company amplifiers in particular, but general, all their products in a very broad sense, a lot of them still believe they're living in the 70s. And when I say that, I mean I often hear a big, bold, meaty, strapping sound that can be a little bit harsh, or at least pushes the mid-range to the edge of being clinical. Examples, well, some of the lower cost, slightly older Technics stuff is one example. Pioneer, I've heard this from Pioneer relatively recently. So I was sort of expecting it here. Next, well, at this price point, I've also heard other amplifiers do a muscle flex thing. That is, the price point is relatively high, so the build budget is relatively high. So of course you want to impress, don't you? And you want to declare to the hi-fi buying public what an amazing thing this is. So, for example, let's draft in some toroidal transformers, shall we, the size of Wembley Stadium, and let's let them loose uncontrolled so that even members of AC/DC would be hiding behind their Marshall stacks. But all of that didn't happen with the Technics G700. None of that actually happened with the Technics G700. I almost hesitate to say this about a Technics amplifier, about any Technics product out of the box, that is. But strike me down with a Mundorf capacitor, this amplifier sounds positively cultured. It's as balanced as a tightrope walker, as friendly as a Labrador dog. It's as relaxed as a Brian Eno fan. It's as neutral as Switzerland. The initial percussion from this track can be dry and it can be punchy from a few amplifiers I've heard at this price point. A lot of them English, some of them American, a few more German, but not the G700. Bass is strong, but it doesn't offer a hammer blow. So, okay, if you are a member of AC/DC and hi folks, then this amplifier might not be for you. There's certainly mass around the lower frequencies, but that bass fits neatly into the mix. It's the sort of bass I like, actually, because it never dominates, it never behaves in a dictatorial manner. Again, I've heard bass from similar amplifiers. The sort of amplifiers that believe they are the Emperor Ming from Flash Gordon. They want to rule your hi-fi and the entire listening room with it. They sound impressive to begin with, and then, well, you tend to get tired and you suddenly remember there's a whole heap of gardening to do. But not the G700. The bass here provides power, but it also has a sense of proportion and a sense of stability, even poise. So bass always sounds part of the musical output instead of being outside of it. The mids are smooth, but also bring along with it an airy presentation. So the soundstage always has a relatively spacious feel to it. Music from the G700 sounds like the sun is adorning it with an early morning glow. There's a kind of freshness and a lightness to the mids. That means the upper mid-range area specifically, well, it's quite nimble and quite maneuverable. This means that the mid-range never drags, it never feels muddy. The upper mid-range and the treble also have a relatively lean feel to them here. There's no excess fat. Both upper mids and treble present you with detail that's easily recognizable. You never have that horrible moment where you're asking yourself, is that a violin or is it a cello? So the tonal accuracy from this upper frequency area is very high indeed. It's also precise and focused. There's a natural focus too. There's nothing manufactured here. Some amplifiers try and fake precision, and they try and fake focus by compressing the mid-range and the treble, and that just makes everything sound rather bright. Focus on the cheap, as it were. But not here. This is sonic precision of high quality. Time for vinyl, methinks, and I noticed recently that Elton John was releasing Madman Across the Water. I saw a wonderfully large, very complex box set out and about, so I thought I'd grab an original copy of the same, and I played the wonderful single Tiny Dancer. And it was only when R. Reg warbled a few seconds that I had a sort of realization. The G700 has a very clean presentation. The soundstage sounds stripped. The spacious mid-range is sometimes so spare, you're convinced that the sound will be bright and clinical. And it never is. For the experienced hi-fi listener, this effect may be slightly disconcerting. It might also take a while to adjust to the sound that the Technics gives you. Now, on my particular high-end vinyl reference system, which spouts a whole heap of information, the more I listened to this Tiny Dancer track, the more I thought that if I really hammered this track, if I really pushed this amplifier, then I had the feeling I would hit a wall somewhere, and finally the mids would start to harden. But as I say, you'd have to really hammer the G700 before that happens. And most people, well, they won't be doing that during a regular listening session. That ultimate response might be something to do with the price tag. Yes, this is a high-end couple of £1,000 of amplifier, but, well, everything has its limits in hi-fi terms, and even amplifiers priced at 2K have their limits. And like I say, I was really pushing the Technics at this point, trying to punish it almost. And I could hear the compressed mids approaching. But as I say, that was an out of the ordinary test, and most people won't even be going there. So I'm sticking with my initial cultured tag. Now, I did give the built-in Phono Amplifier a listen, and I tried it in moving coil mode. I thought this would be a stricter test than going moving magnet. And, well, the results, it's fine. It's less interesting than a good external Phono Amplifier. The internal model, well, it sort of dampens the excitement. The music sounds a little bit more run-of-the-mill. It's perfectly acceptable. There's nothing obviously problematic besides maybe a slight edge during the vocal crescendos, for example. But it's fine for now if you're short of cash after buying this rather expensive amplifier. But I do recommend an upgrade when you can. Now, there is a built-in headphone amplifier here, and I gave that a test too. Much of the personality of the headphone amplifier in the G700 is of a similar stripe to the amplifier as a whole. The only difference I would note here is that the detail is possibly more precise and accurate in the headphone amp in exchange for a little bit less space, a little bit less air when compared to a standard speaker setup. However, I did enjoy listening to the built-in headphone amplifier, so I give that a thumbs up. I then turned to the internal DAC and I played a DSD file, specifically Eric Bibb's Meeting at the Building via DSD 128. And I have to say, initially, I could hear a little bit of clinical edge in the upper mids, and I don't blame the Technics for this. I do blame my laptop. Laptops are not the best if you're going to be playing digital music. They are a noisy digital source. They're a computer. There's nothing specialized about a laptop. They're there as a general computing device. They do 1,000,001 things. Music is just one of those 1,000,001 things. So a laptop is full of high frequency noise, and it will pass that noise down to your amp and through the speakers and into your ear. So I would look at something a little bit more specialist if you're going to be playing digital music through this Technics amp. Why spoil the wonderful sounds from this Technics amp by having a noisy digital source? It does sound a little bit odd, especially if you're spending out £2,000 plus for this box. Anyway, I would go for a DAP, digital audio player, and I would plug that in however it needs to be plugged in, whether it's via optical, coax, or whatever. Even so, generally speaking, when I did use a DAP, I have a modded Astle and Kern. It's modded in the USA by Red Wine. Is Red Wine still going? Anyway, they did the upgrade. But I was very happy in general terms with the DAC. It offered lots of detail and lots of insight, especially around the mid-range. So that's the review. How do I conclude it? How do I conclude the review of the Technics G700? Well, let me give you a few final thoughts, and then I'll look at some pros and cons, and I'll give you a final rating. Now, I haven't been as surprised by a piece of hi-fi as I was by the Technics Su-G700M2 for some time. Part of the reason behind that is that I think Technics as a company, well, I think they treated this box with a measure of seriousness. This is an amplifier. Let me just allow that to sink in. What I mean by that, it's nothing more or less than an amplifier. There's no Bluetooth in this one. Technics haven't gone all in one here and stuffed a CD player in the chassis. There's no radio. There's nothing except an amplifier. And I reckon that's to the benefit of the final sound quality. So on that note, let's look at the pros and cons, shall we? In the good section, well, I'm a sucker for VU meters, so I'm going to put VU meters here. Also, I really enjoyed the mid-range and the general level. I thought it was very smooth. Similarly, I really liked the treble. I thought it was fragile and quite delicate. As I say, the bass never actually dominated the soundstage, which I thought was to the sonic benefit generally. And so I liked the organic bass response. The remote control, again, never really bothered me, and that's a good thing. Remotes are there to be forgotten about because they should work well, and this one did. The built-in headphone amplifier too was surprisingly good. And for the bad column, well, I suppose I'm being picky. These are not particularly bad. I think they're just an opportunity missed by Technics. So I really wanted to see a USB-A port as well as the B. I actually would have preferred the A to the B if I was given the choice, but hey. Also, I would have liked to have seen a few bases covered by including one or two more RC8 input pairings. The items you see in the bad column, they're not super important, they're just ever so slight irritations on my part. And that's the reason, folks, that I need to give this particular amplifier an 8 and a groovy award. Congratulations to Technics. And thank you for staying to the end of this video, and thank you also very much indeed for your support. And if I could just ask you to stretch that support just a little bit by clicking down yonder on the like and also subscribe buttons, that'd be a big help for the channel. Keeps us moving swiftly through the algorithm and all that. Check the description down below if you want to navigate through this video. There are chapter headings there, so you can move about and find the bit you want to see. There's also other links, excuse me, whew, I am leaking. There are other links down there relating to my Facebook group, which you're welcome to join, and my website, which has hundreds of reviews and all kinds of features, and there's interviews and a whole mountain of news and goodness knows what else, CD reviews, vinyl, oh yeah. So check that out, a load of stuff there you won't see here. And my Patreon page also has exclusive items on offer. This particular video, well, the amplifier itself is pretty old hat to Patreon supporters because I did a Patreon preview of this amplifier in Patreon and I did a bit of a walk around, so it should be fairly familiar to Patreon users. If you want a little bit of early insight into forthcoming reviews, check out Patreon. The Patreon previews, well, there'll be more of them. There's also a hi-fi tour I'm doing. There's also exclusive buyer's guides over there and other stuff. You also get early access to the videos you see here. I normally post them, I don't know, 3-4 days before you see them on this channel. So check out the Patreon page. I will be back on Tuesday for Tuneful Tuesday. And we're going to be doing a magazine, vinyl news, that'll be there. There'll be vinyl reviews and a book or two. So I hope to see you then, folks. Let's have your company. And until that time, bye-bye for now.